Hello, welcome to The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. The European Union accuses Russia of not really wanting peace with Ukraine. Mark Carney explains why he's picking the EU over the United States for his first foreign trip as Prime Minister of Canada. And Rwanda announces severing ties with Belgium for consistently undermining by the country in the ongoing conflict in the DRC. Let's begin The World Today. Scenes from a horror movie. That's how Ukrainian soldiers at the front line of the war with Russia in the Kursk region have described scenes there. The BBC has been going through extensive accounts from Ukrainian troops and who recount a catastrophic withdrawal in the face of heavy fire and columns of military equipment destroyed and constant attacks from swarms of Russian drones. The soldiers who spoke over social media were given aliases to protect their identity. Some gave accounts of the collapse as Ukraine lost Syria, the largest town it held. Russian restrictions on travel to the front have meant it is not possible to get a full picture of the situation. But this is how 5 Ukrainian soldiers described to the BBC what had happened. Movement of men, logistics and equipment have been reliant on one major route between Syria and Ukraine's Sumy region, but it's been impossible to leave during the day. In the meantime, the proposed ceasefire brokered by the United States is being discussed by the United States and Russia. President Trump is trying to win Putin's support for the 30-day ceasefire proposal that Ukraine accepted last week as both sides continue trading heavy aerial attacks through the weekend. Russia moved closer to eject Ukrainian forces from their months-old foothold in the western region of Kursk. Trump says they'll be discussing power plants as well as dividing other assets such as land. He was saying this in response to a question by reporters about what concessions are being considered in ceasefire negotiations. He said, we'll be talking about land, we'll be talking about power plants. We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets. Trump gave no details, but what was most likely he was referring to is the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia facility in Ukraine, Europe's largest nuclear plant. Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of risking an accident at the plant with their actions. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has confirmed that President Putin will be speaking by telephone with the U.S. president on Tuesday. He's declined, however, to comment on Trump's remarks about land and power plants. Meanwhile, the European Union's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, says Russia cannot be trusted and will seize the opportunity for peace talks with the United States, present all kinds of demands. She describes the continuing peace talks as shuttle diplomacy, saying there's no negotiating table. It comes as the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer says more than 30 countries could be involved in the coalition of the willing to provide military support to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. Ms. Kallas was speaking on the sidelines of a European Union meeting on Ukraine.
We have the Foreign Affairs Council today. I have different topics. So first, of course, we're going to discuss Ukraine, and we really welcome the Jeddah talks and the result of it. Now we need to really see that the ball is in Russia's court and what kind of conditions they are presenting, which is a big question whether they want peace. Then, of course, we're going to discuss Middle East and also the developments in Gaza. We welcome the Arab reconstruction plan, Gaza reconstruction plan, and try to help as much as we can. And then on Syria, the violence outbreak is very worrying, and it shows that the hope in Syria is really hanging by thread. This shows that we need to do more in order to really show that Syria is going to the right direction. We need to work with our regional partners when it comes to Syria, and we also have today the Syria conference where we also discuss what can we do that Syria would be stable and peaceful.
Well, Ukraine and Russia are continuing to exchange strikes. They both did overnight. Ukraine says one local resident was killed after a drone targeted his car in the frontline town of Minorad in the eastern Donetsk region. Energy infrastructure has also been affected. Parts of Ukraine have been without power following the strikes. Ukraine, however, says Russian forces are continuing their efforts across the border and invade another part of Ukraine. That's the northern region of Sumy. Russian forces have been using small assault groups to attack Ukrainian positions and also subversive groups to carry out reconnaissance and plant landmines, as per the spokesperson for the Ukrainian State Border Service. But he claims that the Ukrainian army has been destroying these groups of infantry either after they cross into the territory or even as they're approaching the border. Away from the war in Ukraine, Yemen's Houthi rebels say there have been fresh U.S. attacks against them, with the number of dead now rising to 53, including 5 children. Targets in the Al Jauf and Hudaydah areas were hit early this morning, according to the rebel group, while the U.S. Central Command says its forces have continued operations. The U.S. launched what it called a decisive and powerful wave of airstrikes on Houthi targets on Saturday as part of efforts to stop Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. Washington says some key Houthi figures are among the dead, but the group has not confirmed this. Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi said his militants would target U.S. ships in the Red Sea as long as the U.S. continued its attacks on Yemen. Updated an earlier death toll, Houthi Health Ministry spokesperson posted on social media platform X that 53 people have been killed, including 5 children and 2 women, and that 98 people had been wounded. U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz told the ABC News Saturday's strikes targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. This is yet to be confirmed by the Houthi leadership. To the United States now, where we see nature at its worst. At least 40 people have died after tornadoes ripped through a swathe of the Midwest and the South. Missouri bearing the brunt of the twisters, which began to spawn on Friday. At least 12 people have died in that state. Powerful winds in Texas and Kansas whipped up dust storms that resulted in vehicle pileups and a dozen deaths. The extreme weather covering an area of the country that is home to more than 100 million people fanned nearly 150 deadly wildfires in Oklahoma. Fatalities were also recorded in Arkansas, Alabama, and Mississippi. Parts of Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, Kentucky, and North Carolina were under flood advisories. More than 320,000 people across the region were without power on Sunday evening, according to tracker power outages. As of this morning, tens of thousands of people were still without power, including more than 57,000 people in Pennsylvania and 25,000 in Missouri. States of emergency have been declared in Arkansas, Georgia, and in Oklahoma. More than 200 Venezuelans alleged by the White House to be gang members have been deported from the U.S. to a supermax prison in El Salvador, even as a U.S. judge tried to block the removals. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele wrote on social media that 238 members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua had arrived in the Central American country, along with 23 members of the international MS-13 gang on Sunday morning. Neither the U.S. government nor El Salvador has identified the detainees nor provided details of their alleged criminality or gang membership. A federal judge's order prevented the Trump administration from invoking a centuries-old wartime law to justify some of the deportations, but the flight had already departed. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt denied the court ruling had been violated, saying the administration did not refuse to comply with the order. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now. Maria, the Trump administration says it did not violate the court order with the deported Venezuelans, but it did, didn't it? Because it didn't wait for the court to make the announcement to give the order. the deportation still went on. So what happens now?
Yes, you are correct. The court order was not yet ready once the deportation happened, and this was not in alignment with what was supposed to happen in accordance with what was supposed to happen next. And so at this time, there is a court order to have them return back, but the question is whether or not that will happen. And so obviously this is now a course between the federal government, and specifically the executive branch of government. The greatest challenge here is that we know that the president has been very clear about his stance, and he has not yet said that he would not follow the court order, but it appears as if that is not in the direction that the White House is moving toward. And so what kind of ability will the court have to make this happen? And so I think this is something we have never seen before. Typically, when the court rules something, even if it is the executive branch of government, they do have to comply accordingly.
And was there a previous agreement with El Salvador and the United States about receiving these prisoners?
It's very interesting to see that the El Salvador president has been quiet other than identifying that they have received the individuals. There's over 200 of them, 238, I believe, that they have received, and kind of outlining who these individuals are, but have not yet stated that there is any thought to comply with the court order. The thought is really at this time is just really recognizing what the president has requested. So clearly there's going to be further conversations between the U.S. and El Salvador. The real question is whether or not El Salvador is looking for some sort of a relationship, knowing that the U.S. has many individuals from El Salvador that have illegally crossed into the country. And so this is a time I think that most Central American countries are being very cautious about how they move, knowing that there are so many of their residents that have moved to the U.S., whether they have done it legally or illegally.
And even if it has the capacity to also house these prisoners, also needs to be looked into. Let's talk about the U.S. strikes now on the Houthi rebels in Yemen. According to President Trump, these attacks, he had promised the rebels would experience hell for those attacks that they had been carrying out on U.S. ships along U.S. ships at sea as a result of U.S. support for Israel in the war in Gaza, which is the reason why those rebels said that they're doing this. What exactly is the plan for this operation? How long will these attacks continue, seeing that the Houthi rebels are definitely not giving in to President Trump's demands?
Yes, you're exactly correct. They are not giving in. I think the president is in the first time that he's seen in a while to see rebels really being very clear that they are not going to comply with his orders. And so I think that he is going to have to find ways to be able to ensure Americans are going to become safe with this. Because many Americans are obviously wondering how this will potentially even affect us right here in America. And so what he has stated and what is happening there, I think is going to be something that the Secretary of State is going to have to, Marco Rubio is going to have to address further.
In the meantime, back home in the U.S., and I'm sure the news media has been inundated with those tornadoes ripping through the Midwest and the South, another disaster for the United States. What is government doing to alleviate the pain as well as the loss following the twisters over the weekend?
Yes, well, this is a state of emergency. People have lost lives as a result of these very unfortunate, tragic windstorms that have occurred, tornadoes, losing homes, losing businesses. And this is something that the U.S. obviously has seen before, but it's going to really be important that the federal government does provide additional aid to assist. And obviously FEMA is right there on the ground beginning to have those proceedings.
Was there a warning about these tornadoes and the areas would have been likely hit?
Yes, there were warnings around the tornadoes. Unfortunately, tornadoes, when they do hit, oftentimes you can see one area is subject to being hit, but sometimes the eye of the storm can move. And depending on how vast the eye of the storm is, does depend on the level of damage.
Let's talk about Trump's upcoming phone call with the Russian president. This is set to happen tomorrow. So a lot of us will be looking forward to learning, what will happen, what they will both be discussing. The last time U.S. officials spoke to Russian officials, it was to discuss the peace in Ukraine, even though it seemed like they prioritized U.S.-Russia relations. Is that what could likely happen tomorrow?
Yes, it's going to be very clear. We know that the U.S. and Russia have a pretty close relationship when President Trump is in office. So we can definitely expect obviously the Ukraine war is going to be the highlight of the discussion. I think the president believes that there could be potentially peace agreements that come forth as a result of his meeting. And so this is, I think, something that, as you mentioned, the world will be watching as this war has been going on for quite some time now. And I know the president would definitely like to be the one to state that he has been able to come to assist with a peace agreement with the two countries.
The real problem here will be trying to convince the Russian president to accept this ceasefire deal because he's laid forth the conditions for Russia accepting this deal, one of which he says is the Ukraine being rejected by NATO, not being a member, not even being considered a future member of NATO, one of these very strong reasons it puts down. So that will feature very highly, between both leaders. But would the U.S. be willing to make concessions for Russia and anything just to accommodate the country accepting a deal, not just for a ceasefire, but for peace in Ukraine?
Yes, it's definitely going to be not just, as you said, ceasefire, but peace. And so we know that there is going to clearly be some concessions that Ukraine is going to have to make. We know that what Russia has been looking for, which is a lot of the reasons why there has not been a peace agreement come forth. And so the question is whether or not President Trump will be able to help and assist Russia to be able to get at least part of what they asked for in the beginning.
And the U.S. did resume military aid to Ukraine. So what is coming to Ukraine so far? What should they be expecting?
Yes, Ukraine should be expecting some sort of relief, but it's really going to be very minimal. We obviously were providing a lot of military ammunition, a lot of military support. But at this time, it's not going to be the same sort of support. It'll be some humanitarian support.
Maria, we appreciate you joining us on the program. I understand you do have to run. Thank you for speaking with us on The World Today.
Have a wonderful day.
One else highlights one of the major stories that broke over the weekend, the fire at a nightclub in North Macedonia. Flags are lowered to half-mast today as hundreds of people turn out for memorial events as the Balkan nation mourned at least 59 people who were killed in that horrific blaze over the weekend. The fire, which broke out early Sunday morning during a hip-hop concert in the club Pulse in the eastern town of Kokani, caused the worst loss of life in the country since 1993, when two deadly plane crashes occurred. Most of those killed were were teenagers and young adults at the club. Arrests have been made, according to the Interior Minister. The mayor of Kokani has announced his resignation over the tragedy. He has urged the circumstances be thoroughly probed, saying that these children were our children. We knew most of them. I knew their families, and some were family friends. The shock and brokenness I feel will last my entire life. He posted this on social media. We're off on a short break now on The World Today. Still ahead. Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney in Paris on his first official foreign visit. What he said about relations with the United States. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. The new Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is in Paris today. It's his first official foreign trip since he was made Prime Minister, one that should have been to the United States. But given the current trade tariffs, Carney is making clear America will no longer be Canada's first choice. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump said that Washington would pause tariffs on imports to fall under the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement until April 2nd, claiming the countries failed to tackle illegal migration and fentanyl trafficking, which they strongly deny. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared that his government will keep tariffs on until America shows respect. During his acceptance speech last week, the U.S. and Canada representatives have renegotiated the USMCA trade deal. They did that on Thursday after significant market declines. Following the meeting, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick called Canada's response to Trump's tariffs tone deaf, while Ontario Premier Doug Ford said the leaders feel that the temperature is being lowered. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has backed calls to make Canada a 51st state of the United States, saying that tariffs show the U.S. is only looking out for the U.S.
As far as the question that you're asking me about hostility, yeah, you look at the EU. Okay, the EU has a GDP basically comparable to that of the United States. The composition of their economy is similar to ours. These are not developing countries, these are developed countries. And yet they have a significant trade surplus with the United States, even though our economies are pretty much the same. These are not low-wage countries. That's a problem. All the president is saying is, we need to equalize treatment. Whatever they do to us, we need to do to them, in addition to pointing to certain sectors that we have to protect. Who can argue against the idea that if some country charges us X to export our products, we should charge them the same? I get it. If you're a country or the EU that's benefiting from the status quo, you feel it is hostile to change the status quo because it's to your benefit. The problem is the President of the United States is looking out for the United States, both in national security and in economic relations. We will reset the basis of our trade relationship, and then we can enter into negotiations for something that's enduring and fair to both sides. That's what the president seeks to do, and that's what it begins by resetting at a reciprocal way the amount of tariffs we charge one another in our trade relationship.
African countries need to pull efforts together to withstand the impending economic global uncertainty brought on by U.S. President Donald Trump's trade tariffs. A comment was made by Professor of International Economic Relations of the Covenant University and consultant ECOWAS Common Investment Market, Professor Jonathan Aremu. Speaking on our Foreign Affairs program, Diplomatic Channel, Professor Aremu says ideally the World Trade Organization should have intervened in the tariff wars, but in the meantime, Nigeria and other African countries need to implement the AFCFTA and other economic continental policies. What would be the chance for Nigeria and the WTO? What leverage do we have there, apart from the Director General being a Nigerian herself?
The Nigerian being the Director General of WTO may not have much effect because the chances of Nigeria and WTO is based on the level of our tradable within the organization. And when you look at it, our trade volume and value is so low to be able to command the desired pressure on the WTO, even if the Director General of WTO is coming from Nigeria. But what I'm saying, and what I'm happy to be able to say, is that one of the greatest things that has happened to Africa and to Nigeria is the putting in place of the African Economic Community Treaty with its first phase of African Continental Free Trade Area, and then moving ahead to African Customs Union, after that one African Common Market, after that African Economic Union, so that we can have our own kind of an arrangement in which we have an economic integration put in places to be able to make sure that the oneness, the one market of Africa is achieved. So that in case there are other global threats, then the domestic economy among African countries can actually be sustained by the interaction of products moving across border in Africa.
You can watch the full interview with Professor Jonathan Aremu and his analysis on the Trump trade tariffs on Diplomatic Channel. It airs tonight at 8:30 p.m. on Sky 515 in the UK and at 11:30 p.m. on DSTV Channel 420. Let's bring in now Senior Executive at a manufacturing industry in Saskatoon, Canada, Olufemi Johnson. Thank you for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I know that people like you have been watching closely the trade tariffs just in case, you're affected by the U.S. Trade wars. So are you affected in any way? I mean, your industry?
Well, the answer is yes, and it's in the affirmative. Every aspect of the Canadian economy is affected. I participate mainly in the dairy industry. I'm a senior executive within the dairy industry, and I can tell you that we're currently in our own negotiations. I mean, if you heard recently, I think somewhere last week, they made it clear that they wanted 250% tariff on dairy products. During the first time of Donald Trump, I was involved in that negotiation around the dairy industry and dairy movement and dairy companies movements across the border between US and Canada. And part of what we ended up agreeing in the current agreement that we have is that we could move around dairy products, but not milk itself. Some derivatives of milk in whatever shape or form of finished product we could move around, but we didn't want to move raw milk itself. And we also went as far as allowing zero tariffs and then graduating tariffs depending on the number of volumes that's moved across the board. I know that we got to a point where we concluded that by the time we are crossing a certain threshold, we start to apply tariffs. And nobody has ever reached that threshold, at least in the last 5 years or so since we agreed on that the provisional agreement with the Trump's first administration. But right now, it's coming back to say, oh, Canada is putting 200% on our dairies. We want to put 250% on theirs, even though that nobody has gotten to that threshold. So yes, it is affecting my industry. It is affecting the whole economy. Car manufacturers, everything. Stainless steel manufacturers, lumber, everything. But one thing is good though, that the Canadian community, the Canadian people, Canadian economy, and the players within it are very, very strong together. Even though he was seen as a little bit weak towards the end of his tenure politically, but as this war started, he really did a good thing by standing up with Trump, confronting him. You would notice that every time he addresses the Canadian people, he also addresses the American people. And a lot of people would wonder why that is. It's basically because there's an estimate that as much as 40% of Canadians are actually American citizens. So you need to know that link and all of that. But as Makani has come into this job now, you see him continuing at that pace, confronting him, standing his ground and saying, look, we're not going to cow to you. And you see what he has done. He's taken up the job. Traditionally, when you take the job as Prime Minister of Canada, the first thing you do is go to the White House and shake hands and take pictures, and say good things. But he's not that. He went straight to Europe. You're going to see Prime Minister of the UK, he's going to see the King, and he has no plans so far to even see Trump, And in the last few weeks as well, you would have seen how Canada has retaliated. So a lot of us are happy the way we're standing. We do not think that with somebody like Trump, being nice or being subservient or being weak is what to work. I think being strong is what to work, and so forth. That is working well. And you would also see it in the polls with the Liberals. Just before this Donald Trump thing, the Liberals were very, very weak in polls, but now they are really coming up, even just before Trudeau left, and now that with McCartney. And then considering McCartney's background as well, he's left the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada.
But I wanted to...
So, yeah. So,
Yeah, so sorry to jump in here. I wanted to find out, if you felt that, the U.S. was, this was an about face. I mean, the tariffs that were slammed on Canada. If you feel that this is an about face that the U.S. is making on its relations with Canada. As you mentioned, yes, these agreements, there have been agreements made in the past, and no one has violated either of the agreements. So do you think that the U.S. is justified in any way with these tariffs?
You see, the notion of the word justification, we would always debate, when we debate that, we would always speak for our own side of the story. Bottom line is that Trump has a base. Trump's base understand bullying, strength, talking talk for the law, right? Trump's base believe that there's a lot of opportunities for them, and the reason why they are not doing well is because their kind of opportunities are being eroded um, by sentiments or by weakness of the Democrats, where they basically agree everybody dumps in the US. So it's more political than anything, and he's doing well with his base. You can't take that away from him. So justification is justified within his own group, within his own people. But the bottom line is, what he has shown is that, look, it's not just about Canada, as you know already. It's about the whole world. Yes, Japan is, yeah, and South Korea is going to get its own. UK is going to get it, even though Starmer is not. It has made it clear that it doesn't intend to confront. The European Union is getting it. You saw what is going to happen. You could add what will happen with the alcohol from Europe more recently. Stainless steel is everybody's game. So it's just basically giving it thinks it's giving a tit for tat for the details. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't get it, or it doesn't just care to get it. Just as I gave you an example about the dairy, it's going to give us 250% tariff on that. We're ready to give him back his tariff. For example, myself and my group, because I work for the biggest dairy of North America. So we've already started looking at where do we go, what do we, there's substantial cross-border between us and the dairy. How do we start to live with the Trump world, and how do we also start to live our lives after Trump world? One thing Trump has not ever done is to highlight the risk of that singular strong leadership economy that Europe and Canada and South Korea, stroke Japan have put the United States. It's a risk, right? Everybody kind of allows the United States to lead while everybody is paying allies and letting them lead. Now, we all realize that it is not impossible for somebody to take over that economy and that political power and then mess everybody up. So at the end of days, we're all just going to emerge stronger. Canada knows already that they need to start making more business friends across the aisle. Maybe start to look at the relationship with China and start to be a little bit more softer rather than arguing with them. Those are the kind of things we're beginning to talk about. And even for us, for example, in the dairy industry, how do we start to think of exporting to Australia, for example, rather than the US? How do we start to make relationship with Brazil, Argentina, and all of these people, because their economies on their own. So we're going to be much stronger. It's doing all the good, actually.
Yeah, and I'm seeing, these countries reaching out to countries that they never realized before had the same things they were looking up to the U.S. for. For example, Brazil, China is now looking to India, I believe, or rather India is looking to Brazil, beg your pardon, for soybean production, something they'd always been looking to the U.S. for. So there a lot of cross-carpeting going on as countries decide to avoid the United States with these tariffs. We know that the Trump administration will be making more announcements later on about what countries are going to be hit. But the Prime Minister is in Paris at the moment. He was supposed to make a trip to the U.S. Well, we say that because we just imagine that the U.S. will be a country of choice when it comes to his first foreign trip. But here he is prioritizing the European Union. And I wanted to ask you how you think that will go, if this is a relationship that can be sustained, because this is him moving from one continent to another, going as far as that to avoid the United States. How do you think this would impact on Canada's manufacturing, production, trade in the long run? Can Canada really avoid the U.S. for that long?
That is actually a big question. That's something that we'll all have to debate on. But the reality is that sometimes you have no choice but to survive, right? And I think that's where we are right now. You're right. The U.S. is a very, very huge economy. The U.S. is an extension of Canada when it comes to economic activity, or Canada is an extension of the U.S., whichever way you want to look at it. All the cars we make are mainly sold in the U.S. Our lumbers are sold in the U.S. Every business goes to the U.S. because it's a big economy. There's no doubt about it. And between us and Europe, there's a big sea to cross. Cost of transportation, shipping, and all of that. There's no doubt about that. Perishable goods are not going to be easy to transport. But the reality is that we have to find a way around this because it's not like we're going to break relationship with the U.S. We cannot break relationship with the U.S. I mean, if you know the history of the U.S. and Canada, they're basically siblings. If you understand the history, how the U.S. came to exist and how Canada came to exist, they were both born by United Kingdom and its leadership and its kingship and royalty. That's what they both are before. Some people went against the crown and ended up becoming the United States, and some people stuck with the crown and ended up being Canada. So it's not going to be permanent breakup, but it tells us that, look, this natural sense of where US is us, whereby anybody that's enemy to the US economically is enemy to us, whereby all our diplomacy is basically following the US, we would have to rethink. So, and talking about relationship with Europe, our relationship with Europe is actually very, very strong. Canada is also an extension of Europe, if you know that. As you know, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom are basically under the leadership of the Crown, right? If you carry a Canadian passport, it's boldly written there that you could walk into the UK embassy, the Australian embassy, the New Zealand embassy, and get yourself sorted out. That's the relationship. So the relationship would always be there, but the cost of doing business would definitely change. We know that the cost is definitely, and we may not be able to compete with some people, and with some other powerful economies like towards the Middle East, like Turkey and the others that are quite close to Europe, may not be able to compete. But we have to find a way to do so. We have to, and that's our reality. And yes, we're going to continue to have relationship with the US, no doubt. But we need to put ourselves in a situation where we understand that it is not taken for granted. The US could make their decisions and their calls, and we have to survive as a nation.
Do you think that this is, Trump's, well, some people believe this is Trump's move to make Canada a 51st state? We also had the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio talking about that there's nothing wrong with Canada becoming a 51st state. I wonder exactly, what the similarities are. I know that, Canada is almost very similar to the United States, socially, culturally, and all of that. But would Canada really fit into the U.S. as a state?
The answer is no. We are ideologically totally different. Canada is, the United States is a strict capitalist economy. Canada has some social plans for itself. Canada will be more similar to the UK in terms of its practices. Yes, as I said, a lot of Canadians are also Americans. But what you see is that it is not uncommon to find younger Canadians in their prime who are going to work in the US and all of that. It is also very common to find older Americans that they want to retire back to Canada. And the reason is because our lives in Canada is totally different ideologically, the way we see things, the way we relate from the US. We can't fit into that because Canada has, for example, universal health. US would never have universal health. Obama tried his best. You saw what happened. In the US, you could carry guns the way you like. We don't want guns around us, Canada is seen as peaceful, friendly, things like sectarian violence, racism. It's not as it is in the US, So we're ideologically different, even though the history is similar, in terms of background. If you go back 200 years ago, how we ended up having a country called Canada and the US, you find out that it all started from the same place. So it's not possible. And the populace, politicians agree across board, that is not going to work. An average person on the streets, that is not going to work because it's a peaceful land. It's a place to come for peace. Canada is a place where you can raise your children and you can be confident that the risk of losing them to societal menace is less, and all of that. So the ideologies are totally different. We're not similar. However, in the past, there's been conversations about having a similar relationship like the one we have in Europe, where we use the same passport, we use the same currency, but we still have our own individuality, similar to what we have in the European Union. And I know that that came up in the 90s, and before that, I think, I don't know which president, United States president. And that conversation has always been around there to say, hey, why do we have a Canadian dollar? Why do we have a Canadian passport and American passports and all of that? But don't forget that Canada is the crown. We're an extension of the crown, which means that we're basically under the king, the crown king. And the United States is under the president. And that fundamental difference would have to be discussed as well. I believe personally that we should have a little more kind of integration, but not becoming a 51st state. That's what we can't live the life of the United States. I would feel very uncomfortable as a person, and a lot of people that I know, having the United States consume us and bring all their own ideologies to us. It can't work.
Yeah, I can feel the vehemence and the rejection from Canada all the way from here in Nigeria. Thank you so much, Olufemi Johnson, for speaking with us on The World Today.
Thank you very much.
We're off on a second break on the program. Still ahead. Residents of Jerusalem celebrating the Jewish holiday of Purim. It's a lot of color and dancing. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. It's been another day of protests in Washington, D.C., as dozens of teachers and students rallied outside the Department of Education to protest Congress's proposed $1 billion budget cut for the Capitol. Well, protesters were rallying with signs reading "Fund Schools, Not Billionaires," and "Kids Deserve Good Schools." Demonstrators were also heard chanting "Pay for books and education, not for war and deportation." These demonstrations come after the House of Representatives narrowly passed a resolution that mandates a reduction of over $1 billion in D.C.'s budget to avoid a government shutdown. The funding bill being reviewed by Congress would revert the district's funding to the 2024 fiscal levels over the course of 6 months, leaving teachers, students, and parents concerned over decreased funding for public schools.
My name is Rose White.
Rwanda has cut diplomatic ties with Belgium and ordered all of the European countries' diplomats to leave the country, giving them only 48 hours. A statement earlier today from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation accused Belgium of consistently undermining Kigali during the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In a swift response from Brussels, Belgium said Rwandan diplomats were no longer welcome in the country as well, adding that Belgium regrets the decision of Rwanda to cut off diplomatic relations. The foreign minister says this is disproportionate. Rwanda's move comes a day after President Paul Kagame accused Belgium of advocating for international sanctions against his country over the conflict in the eastern DRC. And at least 5 people were killed, 22 others injured when a concrete beam under construction in an expressway bridge near Rama 2 Road in Chomtong district of Bangkok fell. This was early Saturday. Bangmot police were alerted to the incident near Rama 2 Soi 25, close to the Rama 3 Dang Kanong expressway, around 1:48 a.m. A concrete beam under construction located about 200 meters from an expressway entrance collapsed onto an existing expressway structure, resulting in multiple injuries and a number of fatalities. More than 20 workers were on the site. We understand about 5 people have died. 5 of those workers were killed in the incident and 22 others were injured. Rescue efforts are continuing. 4 victims have been recovered from the debris. Another body remains missing. The 5 deaths include 3 Thai nationals, 1 engineer and 2 workers, and 2 foreign workers. The clashes have broken out between police and pro-Palestinian demonstrators in Milan as hundreds rallied to demand a permanent ceasefire in Gaza amid a stalemate in truce talks between Israel and Hamas. Red smoke plumes fill the air as the sounds of explosives rang through the streets of the Italian city. Some of those protesters were also seen throwing objects at the police as they approached the crowd. And before the clashes, demonstrators were marching with Palestinian flags and placards reading "Hands off the West Bank" and "Glory to the Martyrs." They were also calling for freedom for prisoners.
Which ceasefire? Just yesterday, kids were shot in the streets. They were trying to get food for their families. So I wouldn't call this a ceasefire. Humanitarian aid is not entering Gaza. And this is more than genocide, because the people in Gaza, they are dying of hunger and lack of medicines. The problem here is the Zionist state of Israel. People must understand that the problem is the Zionist state of Israel. They are bombing Syria, they are staying in Syria, they are staying in Lebanon, they are not allowing humanitarian aid in Lebanon and in Palestine. The big problem is the state of Israel.
The European Union is actually supporting the genocide in Gaza. And that they, for example, the foreign minister of Germany, she's always backing up Israel's policy. And even if the ICC told that Netanyahu and Gallant should be arrested, the German government said that they wouldn't arrest Netanyahu, and even if they are war criminals.
We declare we are in full solidarity with all.
Well, from one protest to another, this time in Rotterdam, a pro-Palestine rally where dozens of cars drove through with protesters on them waving flags, demanding a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and condemning Israel's military actions and aid blockade amid a stalemate in ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas. Vehicles drove through the streets, honking and waving Palestinian, Lebanese and Yemeni flags, while police officers patrolled the parade on bicycles. Organizers say the urgency of aid delivery in Gaza, where over 2 million people face severe shortages of food, water, medical supplies, is urgent.
The Israeli IDF, let me say that, they are not cooperating with the aid that the way it should be. What they are doing is that they are following their own agenda, and that agenda is very dangerous. For now, we have a ceasefire, and what we are expecting from Israel or other countries like the US is to help not to stop the aid and to blockade that, but to continue with the aid for the people of Gaza.
And in Syria, a group of volunteers led by the Catholic Scouts of Aleppo has been collecting aid for victims of the killings in the coastal region. This month, violence has flared between government-aligned militia and those accused of being supporters of former President Bashar al-Assad in Syria's coastal regions. Media outlets have been reporting the deaths of over 1,500 people, including 800 civilians, many from the country's Alawite and Christian minorities, although there are no official figures from inside the country. Pro-government groups are accused of carrying out revenge killings and massacres, while interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa has said those involved would be held accountable, even as his own allies, and that a committee would be formed to investigate. The Alawites, the religious group, which also included former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, account for 10% of the country's population, living mostly in the coastal regions. Public health experts say the world is surrounded by an invisible killer. One so common we barely notice it shortening our lives. It's causing heart attacks, type 2 diabetes, and studies even link it to dementia. What do you think it could be? Well, it's pretty silent. It's noise loud enough to impact on your health. They say its impact goes beyond damaging hearing for humans. Professor Charlotte Clark from St. George's University of London says it's a public health crisis, and we've got huge numbers of people exposed in their everyday life. An investigation into the UK probed how noise becomes dangerous, chatting to the people whose health is suffering and finding if there's any way of overcoming a noisy world. This investigation involved an eerily silent sound laboratory, seeing how the body reacts to different noise when played. Across Europe, noise is linked to 12,000 early deaths a year, as well as millions of cases of severely disturbed sleep and serious noise annoyance, which can impact on mental health. So thousands have gathered at South Africa's legislative capital on Saturday to take part in the Cape Town Carnival of 2025, a vibrant celebration of the city's culture, community and diversity. A parade saw the participation of various local artists, numerous community groups, as well as the City of Cape Town, firefighters and DHL Stormers rugby players. The carnival also featured an entertainment village, complete with a performance stage and food trucks. Marking its 15th anniversary, the carnival has blossomed into a must-attend family-friendly celebration that showcases South Africa's rich diversity and culture.
It's been a kaleidoscope of color. It's just been a brilliant time. It's my first time here at the Cape Town Carnival, and I believe it's celebrating its 15th anniversary. So for me, it's been really an exciting evening tonight. Erika, the Brazilian dancer, the flamenco dancer, she really just exhibited exuberance, dance, personality, and we even took a photo of her. And that for me stood out. But everybody else who represented a community, and at the moment Cape Town is probably the best run municipality in Southern Africa. And if everybody could copy in South Africa, could copy Cape Town's example, South Africa would be a better place.
We'll end with another carnival, this time in Jerusalem, which is celebrating the colorful Jewish holiday of Purim with a parade. Well, these pictures we're seeing are from Sunday's live dance performances, with locals enjoying the festivities, many dressed in colorful costumes. One of the participants said that he was wearing a Saudi outfit because he was wearing a Saudi outfit because his wife was recently in Saudi Arabia and brought this, that's the outfit for him. Jewish communities mark Purim on March 14th each year. It marks the time in 54 BC when the Jewish people were saved from annihilation at the hands of an official in the Persian Empire. Cultural diversity around the world. Thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Anna Running.